Welcome back. We're now switching to look at the Constitution and what looks like the past 2 weeks or thereabout, the executive and the judiciary have been and some what looked like loggerheads over certain actions being taken by the legislature as concerns the Constitution. It's taken them many months to put together from the states, from the federal down to the state and back up to the federal level. They've had discussions on different aspects of the Constitution. Of particular note are areas, a few of the areas I want to highlight that the president or the executive seem to be disagreeing with, that's forcing them to send the document back to the National Assembly and head out to the Supreme Court. One of those areas, the proposed amendment that every child be entitled to free education. The president said there is no dichotomy between public and private education. Section 15 of the Child's Rights Act 2003 and Section 2 of the Compulsory Universal Free Basic Education 2004 have made education free and compulsory from primary to junior secondary school for every Nigerian child. So there was no need for that portion to be brought back into the Constitution because that would be duplicating function. Well, I don't have all the notes, neither do I think Aleo has explanation for all of this. But the federal government's gone to the Supreme Court seeking interpretation or seeking a judgment that will stop the National Assembly from vetoing the president's powers. What is the way to go as regards this Constitution? This is what we want to look at today, the controversy around the Constitution amendment. Then we have Mr. John Oloyede, a legal practitioner.
Good morning.
And Mr. Wahab Shitu. Thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
All right, let's begin with you, Mr. Shitu. What is your take of this back and forth between the executive and the legislature as regards the Constitution?
Well, my take is that it is healthy for our democracy because it allows all the institutions that ought to support the democratic process to effectively play their role. And in the process of this kind of disagreement, our democratic institutions will become more strengthened. It is better if issues are resolved or disagreements is a product of dialogue, consensus like this, rather than resort to some other extra constitutional measures. So what is happening between the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria before May 2009 and the National Assembly is healthy for our democracy. Healthy in the sense that now it will give the judiciary, the highest court of the land, the opportunity of making far-reaching pronouncements on these areas of disagreements, which ultimately will deepen our jurisprudence and grow our democracy. We know that in any democracy, so to say, constitutional amendment is evolutionary and dynamic. I mean, in a federation such as we have, taking a cue from even the US, India, and some other, Mexico and some other democracies around the world, you see that they are constantly tinkering with their constitution as demands arises. So the fact that they want to amend constitution, it has degenerated into this kind of controversy, and this kind of controversy has ultimately also resulted in a dispute being submitted to the Supreme Court for adjudication, or to gladden all of us here, because our democracy is working.
Absolutely.
Yes. Well, my take is that, quite contrary to the impression that there is a controversy, there is no controversy. The democratic institutions have been invested with powers to do certain things, and they are just discharging the obligations imposed on them by the Constitution. Now, taking it to America, for instance, Obamacare. I mean, despite the fact that it has been passed, the Supreme Court is there are still issues relating to that particular piece of legislation that the Supreme Court is still to pronounce upon. And so, if the country where we actually borrowed this kind of system we have from, if they're having issues like this resolved by their judiciary, I don't think it's out of place for us to suffer the same fate. Be that as it may, in the final analysis, you see, I really ought not to go into the merits of the issues that have been generated, but the fact remains that the legislature has done its own job. The president has raised salient issues and has addressed them to the legislature. Now, both parties have submitted the issues raised to the judiciary. That is as it should be. You cannot afford to have a piece of legislation that ultimately will be declared null and void as against the provisions of the Constitution. While they have raised the issue of the Child Rights Act, that okay, something is been provided for in the Child Rights Act, you know that there are levels. Each legislations have different levels. The supreme most legal document in Nigeria is the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So you may see a situation where yes, an issue has been raised in a particular act, and that act, if it ever comes up for the deliberation before a court of law, that act, any provision inside the act that goes contrary to any provision of the Constitution may be knocked down as being null and void to the extent of its inconsistency with the ultimate law, the gun norm. So it is better at this point in time for the Supreme Court to make a pronouncement and say, look, the Child Rights Act, yes, there's provision for it, but what kind of status do you want this issue of free education at this particular level? What kind of status do you want it to have? Should it have a constitutional flavor, or should it be just an ordinary act which is not, covered by the Constitution per se? Because if it is a very serious issue, universal basic education. And so I believe personally that it should be something that the Constitution should take care of. So that governments that come cannot say, for instance, you have a situation of Freedom of Information Act in Nigeria. You have a situation where some state governments say, oh, it has to be domiciled before we can enforce it. And so the reason for the enactment of that piece of legislation has been virtually defeated, because some states are saying we have not domiciled it. But if that piece of legislation has a constitutional flavor, we will not be talking of that, because it binds every state, and any law in any state that does not conform with that constitutional provision will be null and void. So that is the issue, and the Supreme Court will take care of it.
Okay. By the way, let's come down. We looked at the overview. Let's look at some of the issues that the president had issue with, or the executive had issues with. One of those had to do with the office of the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice. And then this clamor back and forth, that needs to be separated. Now, the amendments that the National Assembly put forward had that office separated, plus section 174A to 174H of the Constitution, as forwarded to the President, set qualifications for the office and granted financial autonomy, security of tenure, and other improved powers to the Attorney General of the Federation. Do you think these are some of the things that are causing this?
Well, the office of the Attorney General of the Federation is a very fundamental office in a constitutional democracy. That office, the Attorney General of the Federation is both the Chief Law Officer of the federal government and Chief Law Officer of the Federation. So he advises the government. He must also act at all times in the best interest of the public. So if somebody is invested with that kind of powers, then he must be seen to be someone who is above board in terms of integrity, in terms of professionalism, in terms of knowledge, in terms of experience, and in terms of exposure. Because the powers vested in the Attorney General are awesome. And so you want to be concerned about the credibility and the integrity of the office holder, and whether he has such kind of independence that can make him deliver on the demands of his office. Now, so the problem of how he's appointed is a very big issue, and the control over his appointment is also a very big issue. How he discharges his responsibilities are also big. What
Attorney General?
Yes, the Attorney General
Appointed by the President.
Attorney General of the Federation is appointed by the President. He's an appointee of the executive.
So
even though the law also expects him to be able to also discharge his responsibilities in a manner that will show that he's not only acting for the executive, but acting for all other arms of government, including the public. You see the contradiction. He should be able to discharge that functions in an unbiased manner. And you will see that in the present campaign that you see, or the last elections. You didn't see the Attorney General of the Federation come out publicly to campaign for any of the aspirants, even though he was appointed by the incumbent president who was also running. I didn't see him come out to start campaigning the way other ministers were going around to campaign. And that's a very strong point. It shows that he recognizes the fact that he is answerable not only to the president, but he is answerable to the constitution and members of the public. And that is very critical. If he had come out, some of us will have, come openly to challenge him. So he behaved like a professional, because the Attorney General must be able to strike a balance, a delicate balance between the interests of the government and the interests of the public. If your rights are violated, the number one person who should be in the forefront of protecting your rights is the Attorney General of the Federation.
Okay,
you understand me? So it must be somebody who can strike that delicate balance.